Hey guys, Knick-Knack here after how long, and as you see from the title, I'm finally doing my Better Late Than Never countdown of my top 10 games of 2021. As always, these are games I played last year, and it's my opinion on what I've enjoyed. Also, since I'm pretty limited with time and money, there will also be plenty of titles that will not be on here. You know, like big titles such as Returnal, It Takes Two, Resident Evil Village, and Tales of Arise. Sorry. So, with that out of the way, let's finally begin. Starting up the countdown at number 10 is Unpacking. This was a title I've heard a couple of people talk about on the internet, so I resubscribed to Game Pass to try it out, and man, what a nice and relaxing experience. This is a puzzle game that follows a woman and her adventure that is going through life. In this game, you're given a living area and you have to unpack items and put them into their proper areas. It may sound boring, but it isn't, because you can play it at your own pace and you're given a lot of items to where the game challenges you in finding where things go. And surprisingly, the items tend to tell a story of our protagonist. The experience is also supported with a calming presentation of pixelated graphics and 16-bit music that sets the tone of each stage. If there's one thing that might turn people off other than its easy difficulty, is it's that the game is pretty short, which is why it's starting the list. But the game resonated with me highly, and I think it's worth trying if you're into relaxing games. At number 9 is Shin Megami Tensei 5. Unfortunately, I'm still in the process of beating it, which is one reason why it's at the spot. But I've put hours into double digits to where I'm confident in including it on here. From where I'm at so far, it's a solid JRPG that I can't seem to put down because of what makes it an SMT game. If you play games like it, then you know how the battles go. But they've added a special meter to make it different from past games. The demon fusion aspects are also slightly changed, as you can give abilities to yourself and your allies, which provide more strategy. Of course, what also SMT is known for is the story, and how the world came to be in it makes me want to see how they'll overcome. As stated earlier, it's only at number 9 because of where I'm at. Other reasons include the meh characters and forgettable soundtrack, but with time, I think I'll be okay with them. Despite what I've said, I'm enjoying it and I'm glad to get my money's worth from it. Coming in at number 8 is The Artful Escape. This was a game I've heard a lot of good things about from people online, so I tried it when it was on Game Pass, and man was surprised. To get this out of the way, the game is pretty low on the list for the sole fact that it's very lacking in gameplay, but everything else is so good that it makes it a memorable experience. In it, you play as a guy named Francis who slowly finds himself on an intergalactic journey because of his musical artistry. What makes it memorable is everything else besides the gameplay, which is a fine platformer rhythm hybrid, but it didn't excite me. Now Francis is an interesting character with seeing his identity struggle and overcoming it. The story that follows him is pretty nice as well. The biggest positive though is the presentation, because this game is beautiful throughout, and I can see why it's nominated for Best OST and Best Art Direction in the Game Awards. You're exploring all these beautiful worlds full of color, with each having a different landscape that's worth taking in. It also helps with the design having a nice 2D style. Since the plot talks about music, the soundtrack is worth a listen, because it's a gorgeous sounding mix of folk rock, space rock, hard rock, and much more. It may not do anything for people who only care about gameplay, but man, it was worth trying. And for those who are into short games with good music, please check this out. Continuing on with number 7 is Honey Pop 2 Double Date. I loved the first game, so I knew I had to play the second, and once I did, I loved every single minute of it. For those that have never heard of the series, it's a combination of a dating sim and a match 3 game. One part of the game consists of talking to the dateable women and getting to know them, while the other part consists of playing a match 3 game to determine if the date goes good or not. Unlike the first game, the gameplay of the second is a complete change. While it's still a match 3 game, you now have to balance dating 2 women at the same time, and that's a nice challenge from before. It also helps that the characters don't feel too cliche, as each one feels like a breath of fresh air. Though I'm mostly emphasizing the gameplay, the other parts are great as well. The character and setting designs are beautiful as before, pun intended. Dialogue is hilarious as before, and the soundtrack just hits hard. The game is not that high on the list though, because there were story bits that took me out of the game, and there weren't secrets compared to the first. Still though, I think this is a game worth checking out if you're into match 3s and hentai waifu shit. My number 6 game goes to Monster Hunter Rise. Before this, my only experience with Monster Hunter was playing a few hours of it on the PSP, and I never looked back until I saw the trailers for this. So I bought because of them, and man am I glad I did. Because of how big the franchise is, I think there's no need to describe the plot and how the gameplay works, because most people already know about it. Getting it out of the way first, the game has some damn good looking areas to it, from the feudal Japanese inspired forests and villages to places that don't belong, like deserts and volcanic islands. The audio is also very good to ears, as the sounds of each attack feels like you're making an impact or not. Of course, you can also talk about audio without mentioning how the music is well varied wherever you're at in the game. Now talking about the main draw, the gameplay is so great to where I can see why people love the crap out of it. It's just so exciting taking these monsters down with some freedom in how you do so thanks to the various weapons you're given. It also helps with the various extra things you can do to upgrade your characters and their allies. I can't really compare other games as a newcomer, but they're great additions. Unfortunately though, this game is a bit low for various reasons, including how it's mandatory to play some missions online, and the fact that I'm still not finished with it. But even so, this is a great game to a point that I might try even future Monster Hunter games because of it. For my number 5, we have Dodgeball Academia. This was a game I had no knowledge of, but then I saw some people talk about it online, so I downloaded it when it was on Game Pass. Talk about a huge surprise, because this is a damn good game. This title is interesting as it's a combination of both a sports game and an RPG. In it, you follow a student who goes to school that acts as a dodgeball training facility and go throughout his day with facing off against people and making friends. It's really tropey, for it feels like an anime, but it's engaging as each adventure feels different. On top of this, the characters are well done and none of them feel even boring thanks to fun dialogue. I also think the game excels in its art style as it gives off that Saturday morning cartoon vibe. The sound could be better though, as there's no voice acting and the music can get pretty repetitive. But of course, what makes this game so good is the gameplay. As stated, it combines sports with RPGs, and each battle plays like a game of dodgeball and how you have the basics of it with throwing, catching, and parrying. What makes it an RPG is how you have health bars, a leveling system, and special attacks you can use by time. Each battle is fun, plays different, and finds a way to challenge you. In addition, the game doesn't overstay its welcome as it's a nice length of 10 to 15 hours with lots of side stuff. I may have played this on Game Pass, but this was a surprise to where I might buy the game. Please support the sleeper hit because I think it needs a sequel. Number 4 goes to Neo, The World Ends With You. This was my most anticipated game last year, and shameful of me to say this, but I still didn't beat it, which is why it's only at 4. But man, am I loving my time with it so much that I have to put it here. In it, you play as a group of characters playing some sort of death game, trying to complete objectives in order to survive. The story and characters honestly aren't the strongest, but it's interesting in seeing them come together and trying to find ways to win the game. Everything else though is what makes this title stand out. The gameplay consists of 2 things: exploring Shibuya and fighting creatures called the Noise. Exploring consists of going around the city and having to do various things to progress. It may sound boring, but it isn't thanks to how full of life Shibuya is. The combat is the other part, and just like the first game, this too has a unique battle system. Each button is equipped to pins you acquire, and each one has a different attack. Throughout the game, you can get different pins for different attacks, and you can mix and match. From that, you attack groups of Noise in real-time battles. Depending on how you go about, they can be really fun and quick, which is nice for its genre. The aforementioned is good, but for me though, just like the first game, my main love for this game is its art design and music. As mentioned, exploring Shibuya is a sight to see, but just seeing the graffiti and anime-inspired look make the world. The experience is also further supported thanks to the soundtrack, as you're given an eclectic array of music that is so good it worms its way into your brain. Now I know I am dumb for putting an unbeaten game this high, but man, is it delivering for me to a point that I'm confident in playing it here. Please support this game, people, because the series deserves the love. Coming in at number 3, we have Metroid Dread. Ever since its reveal, this had become one of my most anticipated for the year, and pretty much I'm glad that it delivered. Now, just like my number 6, Metroid Dread is a game that needs no introduction because mostly everyone knows what Metroid is. If you've played the 2D games, then you're at home because this game plays the same as the past few, particularly Samus Returns. Honestly, the plot is just alright, and isn't the franchise's strong suit. However, everything else makes the game really solid. Presentation-wise, Dread has a nice 2.5D look to it, with some really crisp-looking backgrounds, and the sound design just felt right, whenever it was enemy encounters or the background. But of course, Metroid's strongest suit is the gameplay, and this one feels buttery smooth thanks to current-gen improvements. This isn't a knock on it, but this is one of those games where if it's not broke, don't fix it applies, as the gameplay, except for a better aiming function, feels the same as past titles. Obviously, this is good because Samus's movements don't feel slow and limited, and the upgrades feel so fun to use. The bosses as well are just so well done, and took some nice trial and error to beat them. They did add one new thing for the game though, and that's the enemies, which are these impenetrable enemies that you need to avoid. And I honestly found them to be a bit annoying until you're given a way to beat them. Speaking of annoying, that and the map structure is why this game is at number 1, because rather than going one place at a time, you're moving all around to where it feels like a hassle. But overall, it didn't take away from my enjoyment exploring the world and beating it in under 10 hours, which was a huge plus for me. You already know, get this game for it's one of the Switch's best, and Metroid definitely deserves the love. At number 2, I'm going with Ender Lilies, Quietus of the Nights. This was a game I knew nothing of, and was something my brother bought on Steam out of nowhere. So I checked it out since it's a 2021 game, and talk about a sleeper hit. This game is a Metroidvania following this one girl who wakes up from a plague that has mutated everything, and it's up to her to save the world thanks to her purifying abilities. The story was intriguing, but a bit confusing. However, like most Metroidvanias, it isn't the game's strongest point though, as everything else is so good. The game has elements of dark fantasy to it, and it's used so beautifully in this presentation. The art style has this ink painting look to it, and the designs of the characters and setting are so nice to look at, with a feeling of dread and despair it gives. It's also supported through the music, as it has a whole bunch of melancholic sounds that support the character's journey of purifying the world. Getting on to gameplay, it has the usual Metroidvania progressions, but the gameplay stands out. Each button is assigned an attack, and throughout the game you defeat bosses to gain new abilities and attacks to continue on. Every attack feels different, and it provides a nice way of choosing how you want to go after enemies. Upgrading your character feels like it takes cues from Hollow Knight as you go around and gain crystals to improve set attacks. There's also leveling up that helps increase your life and attack power, which is great. Speaking more on Hollow Knight, the health system takes a bit from it as it limits you on how much you can use, as you're limited to a few and have to find more that's scattered around. It gives a great challenge, especially when fighting the bosses that are very fun to go at. I honestly can't find any big flaws to it, and surprisingly, I've enjoyed it more than Metroid. If you love the genre and are itching for some of the best games of it, this one is a must-play. And finally, at number 1, my favorite game of 2021 is Persona 5 Strikers. I was a bit limited on what I played this year, as I said again, which makes this a default game, sort of. That, however, does not mean Strikers is mid, because I really enjoyed my time with it. This title takes place months after P5 and follows our heroes having a road trip around Japan after finding out some weird shit is happening to a country in which they have to come to rescue. For a spin-off, it has the usual Persona tropes, but the story is told pretty well. It also helps with being introduced to new characters, with them being fleshed out to where you have emotions for them. Speaking of Persona tropes, this game still holds the aesthetic that made 5 amazing. The menus have pizzazz, and areas you go around are all full of life and have a sweet design to them. Of course, you can't talk about Persona without mentioning the audio, and it excels. The voice acting is still as strong, and the music delivers again. Now from the trailers and the developers, you can assume that this is just a Persona Muso game, but it isn't. Strikers plays like an action RPG, thanks to including the features from P5. There's the obvious fusion feature and collecting personas from battles. One huge thing they did was making upgrades to personas more accessible thanks to a point system. Social links aren't present, but they're replaced with the bond system, which rewards you with progression. Lastly is the combat, and though it has the hack and slash gameplay of Muso, it's different as it's not stiff, has varying attacks, and the weakness exploitation of SMT. Considering there's an end goal and the AI isn't brain dead, going through enemies is more fun than Dynasty Warriors games. It might get tedious, and they might be a bit too long at 50 plus hours, but I overall enjoyed Strikers, and it's a great epilogue to P5. So finally, those were my favorite games of 2021. It might be a bit too late, but better late than never, right? Like always, let me know what your favorite games were last year. And that's pretty much it. As always, I want to thank you for watching. Take it easy, and until next video, which probably might be from a year now, thanks to work and other shit. Yeah.